When we first started, we just thought, all right, let's just film this, and this is the one that goes out that week. And it then became an absolute mess. We're still working on the video until like 2, 3 a.m. the morning it's meant to go live. We were stubborn for a little bit on that. I think we finally did challenge it, and we figured, all right, okay, fine. We got to get ahead of ourselves. So now the new rule is this. We should always be at least 5 episodes ahead of ourselves. Ideally, 10 episodes ahead.
We were at a point where we're like, okay, we have to start booking some guests. It can't just be Hayden and I talking the whole time. I mean, it could be, but our intention was to bring in editors of all shapes and sizes to talk about editing.
What we did then is we started researching, okay, what really big films are coming out? Let's see if we can get that editor. In other instances, is there anything on our minds that I feel like we can talk about ourselves? Each of us don't quite like the idea of just starting recording and just making it up as we go along. Essentially, we need to find a conversation that we're both passionate and engaged to talk about.
Something that is amazing that you taught me, Hayden, was instead of just, picking our favorite TV shows or our favorite editors, for example, our Chancellor episode. Chancellor is a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. I love him. And I was just like, shoot, we should just talk to him right now. And you were like, wait a second, how are we going to package Chancellor? And when we say package, what we're referring to is how can we title and thumbnail this conversation, essentially? Like, how are we going to say, this is why Mr. Beast should care about Taylor Swift's music video editor?
We could get anyone like, hey, you edited this thing, great, cool, let's have a chat about it. But the big question I always have to ask is that how can we convince a Mr. Beast editor to want to listen to this person? How can we package them?
That's just a huge part of the process and really helps us make a ton of decisions before we even reach out to a potential guest.
This interview was recorded by the best video podcasting tool, Riverside.
Honestly, if you're not using Riverside for all of your virtual meetings, you're making a big mistake.
I've even been using it for consultations. As soon as we're done, I get to send them the entire recording.
And not to mention the recording quality is it's good.
Whereas other virtual meeting services can only do up to 720, Riverside can do 4K.
Which is why we like to use it for podcasting. And we love it because it records each audio and video track separately, so that editing is such a breeze when we get into post.
Which means our editor can get started on cutting it almost immediately.
And even if you or your guest has absolute garbage internet, it doesn't matter. Because remember that one time when we were in the hotel room?
I mean, the call kept on jostling. I thought we lost it, but because Riverside records locally and then uploads, the call was perfect. And it's easy for the guests. They don't need to install anything. You just send them the link and you can start recording.
It even says like, roll out the red carpet. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it makes me feel special.
It makes me feel so special.
If you're podcasting, creating video content, or recording online calls, then sign up to riverside.fm for free and use code EDITINGPODCAST for 20% off.
And you can find that link in the description, and we'll see you back in the interview.
One of the big things we needed to do is we needed to produce these. We needed to get a producer.
Hi, guys.
The main reason why this podcast hasn't fallen apart yet.
This woman right here.
Thank you. I don't know how to respond to that. I feel like mainly what I do is I bully people in the group chat to make a podcast.
And it works.
All right, we've got to get an episode recorded. What happens?
Basically, what I'm doing is reenacting the book So You Want to Start a Podcast by Kristen Meinster. Hayden, impulse ordered it from Amazon, and it's maybe the best book you could ever purchase if you want to start a podcast. There's a chapter in there about producing, and the author basically just flexes, just so you know, I can book anyone. I can book professional athletes. I can book Taylor Swift, and I'm going to tell you how. And I'm like, great, tell me how. The first thing I did was just familiarize myself with the market. Who are the major players in editing? We started to get bigger and bigger guests, and I feel like the guests that made me go, oh, was when we booked Nicholas Mansour, who edited my favorite movie last year. No. A lot of producing is just okay, how can I contact this person in a professional way? Go through the proper channels, whether it's a contact form on a website, whether it's an email, whether they have a manager, whether they have a publicist.
What would you say then is a professional email?
A professional email does what it says on the tin. I usually put interview request with a podcast with 50,000 subscribers. And I always end on a question. Do you have an availability in May? I like opening it up with a question so they can reply to the question right away, and it gives them more initiative.
Yeah.
We'd find a day in the calendar that works for everyone. We've got to have a day that works for Jordan, Hayden, me, and the guests. So we're balancing 4 different calendars. Once we find a day that works, then they get a call sheet. And this has everything you need, your address if it's in person, and the Riverside link if it's remote. Now, Riverside has been badass. Am I allowed to swear? It's been bad A. It's been cool because none of our guests have to download software, unlike other video call conferences. Riverside is stupid proof for your guests to use. You don't have to download anything. It's literally all in browser. And on the producer side, all I do is I make a Riverside room, copy the link, throw it into a call sheet email, and that guest literally just clicks the email and they're in the podcast studio.
So we've scheduled them for the actual shoot day, but one of the most important parts of this step is also the pre-interview. And we kind of get a really good way of gauging what do they want to talk about.
If we just come in with our own agenda and we're like, okay, this is what's interesting to us, we're going to ask a question, they're going to give a 20-second response, and then we're going to be like, okay, cool, here's the next question. And then the momentum is super stale. And so that pre-interview call is so crucial.
We kind of do like a mini podcast pre-interview on Riverside as well, where we essentially ask them what's on their mind and what it is that they want to talk about. And one of the cheeky features of Riverside is that it transcribes the entire call. So afterwards we can read through the conversation and find what topics excite us the most.
Next up, it's time to put on your host cap. Once we get some of these best editors in the world that Ashley just booked, it's our job to do a little bit of research. And so the biggest thing that I like to do when researching a guest is I like to honestly learn about them a little bit personally. So I like to go on their social medias really quick and just see who they are, kind of just get a sense of what their vibe is. And then the second step for me is to watch their work and just really start diving into it and breaking it down, reverse engineering it.
When we have a guest booked, I then do start the research phase myself. I think we even do it separately. One of the first things that I like to do, let's just say we are bringing in a creator. I check out their latest video, and then I check out their oldest video. And I can get a really good sense of their journey just by looking at both of those videos. When it comes to also film and TV, it is a little bit the same process. First of all, I'll go into that film and TV show that gives me what was the best response I got out of this. An instance in one of our most popular episodes was with the movie Missing. Their party sequence was fantastic. And then I also wanted to know the process on how did they make a screen life movie. I actually don't know how to make a screen life movie. What questions would I ask to find out how to make one? I don't like to come into these as an equal. I want to come into this as a student.
Editors are invisible artists and they do absolutely incredible things that we would have never thought of. Just little things like Simon Smith saying, I made sure that an actor didn't blink with VFX. And just being able to try to pull out those little things that we would never know is, I think, the biggest success when we ask a good question. So today's shoot day. Hayden, what are we going to do? How are we going to set up the recording process? We have 2 different ways to record. We record remotely on Riverside, and we record also in person from time to time.
Obviously, not all editors are in Los Angeles. Since we're developing podcasts, we can't quite afford to travel. Riverside's been able to make sure that we can connect to everyone across the world.
Let's just say we're in person right now. Let's touch on what we do to set up really quick.
So we're very fortunate enough that the home that I live in has 2 living rooms, and we've turned one of them into the studio. Despite us growing, we are still a little bit of a skeleton crew, and so it is still up to me to be setting up the cameras and the lights. We shoot for the guest, we give them the nice lens, we give them the 50mm, and then we give ourselves the 16-35, which is then able to then frame both of us pretty well. And then we also then have the wide, so if we have a bit of banter, we're laughing, we're all talking amongst each other, we cut to the wide. But the main reason why we have so many cameras is because, well, we're introverts, we're a bit difficult to talk to sometimes. We need to cut around that. The easiest way to cut around that is with multiple cameras. And also, we're still figuring out lighting. If anyone knows how to make this look better, please, we would love to consult with you on how we can light up this studio. This is a podcast on the web media. The golden rule is that as soon as they click on your video, they're looking for the first reason to click off. So we have to convince you to listen to the entire conversation. That is an incredibly challenging process.
And we did start out with our intros filming them in person, and now since then we've actually decided that is way too difficult, especially since we live fairly far apart. And so Sometimes we hop on Riverside and knock out those intros with audio only.
It's easier for us to then use Riverside to record our intros, and then we can send that to our intro editor. Our podcast editor isn't also doing the intro. And right now our lead editor in that is Daniel, also known as Dodford.
Daniel, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and about your intro editing process?
Hayden approached me ages ago about editing these things, and I jumped on it because it seems like the best playground for editing in general. I come from short form editing first. I think I had a lot of practice with that regard, trying to tell a story as quickly as possible.
There will be times when you don't hear from me for like a month or so, and suddenly I'll go, hey Daniel, I got something for you. And then what we do is then we then send you the script. Sometimes we even have a quick call. Here are some of the best points that we had. Here is some sound bites that we really, really liked. And then also here is the intro that we hand off to you. What's the first step that you do?
The first thing I do is thank you guys for writing something so great. You're doing a paper edit in your head already when that writing is that good a lot of the time. Like, you just find those really good quotes and you work around and then use them as like kind of these landing points where everything else has to bounce around and build up to. But it's mostly I just bounce off the writing, which is already really good. I do dive into doing like these storyboards in Google Docs. You're doing a lot of that big creative thinking in one go. With the same brain, it's all going to have like a sort of cohesive feel to it. Whereas if I'm chipping away at a long edit for days/weeks, you're accessing different parts of your brain a lot of the time, which can end up being kind of cluttered.
So Daniel, you've taken that amazing, storyboarding, director-minded process, and you've applied it to a lot of our intros that have been absolutely incredible, and we're so thankful for that. Could you take us step-by-step through your intro that you made with Colin and Samir? I'd like to get inside of your brain a little bit and see how you operate.
I'm looking at this document. It starts with barrage of 2 to 4 Colin and Samir banging quotes written by the one and only Hayden.
Colin and Samir. They are described as your favorite YouTubers, favorite YouTuber.
That was just enough then. It's like, okay, I'm going to start intensely with people saying their name. I'm trying to build that credibility of these large faces and credible names.
Colin and Samir.
Really, I'm just going through line by line and deciding how is the best visual way to represent this idea. You always have to trust that the audience understands where you're going with it. So there's a bit of wiggle room to kind of be abstract a lot of the time. Like when they're standing in front of the big YouTube logo, that was my way of saying, they're leading the charge. They feel like they're in front of the pack. They've got this whole community behind them. The viewers aren't stupid. They'll pick up on those kind of subconscious decisions.
There was a quite surprising moment when you first sent me the draft. You actually did change the ending from what we wrote.
Sometimes when you're writing, you have like a strong idea of what it should be, and then naturally everyone who's ever edited a video ever in their life knows that sometimes it can't go exactly that way. I know what you're trying to say in the overall bigger picture, and I can slightly move us into a different direction. Like this example, I knew that I had to really push the idea of a documentary, so I went trawling for quotes of them saying the word documentary, like how they want to make a documentary.
Our roots are in documentary.
It still fit into your bigger plan of what the intro had to be, and so I felt safe to kind of just move us in a different direction.
So once you finish that, you polish it, you get a first draft. What do you do next?
Well, I send that over to you guys. You promptly get back with some great notes, and usually it's not that much. You will have a few tweaks and stuff, but it's usually not anything major, structural. I've learned a lot about storytelling when you guys give me those notes, because it's usually just about enhancing what's already there.
But then that is it then. Like, you send us the feedback on the nitpick version, which would be V3, and then that is the version that goes live, and then we then throw that in just before the full episode, and then we're done. And then you invoice us, and then Jordan tells me off. It's like, we paid him that much?
No, every single cent is 100% worth it.
Thank you guys, appreciate that. Let's not let the ball stop rolling then.
What is the next step? How do we structure a conversation with two different brains trying to come together to craft one?
That can get messy quickly, and I think we even have made that mistake. We've had a challenge where we both went in with kind of questions kind of blindly, didn't really communicate, and then the whole interview became an absolute mess. What is the worst phrase in editing? We'll fix it in post. No, you don't. You shouldn't fix it in post. If we want a structure, let's get the structure. What is the Act 1 conversation? What is the Act 2 conversation? What is the Act 3 conversation? Conversations still go all over the place when we record, but we already have that plan. and we can then give that to our editor, and that editor now has a good understanding of the structure that we want the interview to be. And so we do start moving some things around. Why don't we ask the editor about what he does? Cheeky segue into our main editor, Tyson.
What's up? I'm Tyson.
When we first started the podcast, we knew straight away that we needed to bring someone into the team who would be editing this. And so that was one of the first hires that we did before we barely even started anything. We often end up recording 2 hours, and it's your job to get it down to roughly 30 minutes or less. What is the step-by-step process to ensure that we get it to that point?
It's a pretty easy process, I would say. It's just mostly just cutting things down very little by little. And it's funny being an editor on the editing podcast. Like, I'm actually learning while I'm editing, and then just listening to the conversation and kind of seeing like where certain things that could be taken out or certain things that could be moved around. So I listen to the whole thing, chop up the whole conversation, and then I watch it again, and that's when I like add the B-roll and kind of more move stuff around and just see where the conversation can go.
Because normally it's a 2-hour recording, but the version you sent me is still roughly an hour. What do you know what to cut?
It takes a lot of time, I would say. Like, I think even the earlier edits before, I probably left in a lot more than I do now. So you just kind of learn to think, what can the conversation give to the viewer? What can the viewer take from the conversation? And it's not even like I've cut full conversations. I'll cut just like conversation could end here.
We've come to realize conversations that we have, they can last for about 10 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes.
We're super repetitive with the way that we talk. So
yeah.
I think Tyson does a great job of cleaning us up, making sure we get to the point and we say things concisely. So when we record remotely, it's a little bit different than when we record in person. You get actually the Riverside recordings. What is that like for you as the editor working with that material?
It's just like really, really easy. I remember the Euphoria episode. Hayden sent me the link from Riverside. I clicked the link, and each individual guest was its own video file and audio file. And so it was really easy and just like really simple just to throw that stuff from Riverside into the timeline.
So what would you tell yourself a year ago when you're just starting your first paid editing gig? What would you say to yourself?
You get in your head a lot, especially about editing, when things aren't like cuts aren't going your way, and you think like oh, am I right for this? It's just a learning process. You can always make something better. We're not striving to be perfect. We're just striving to get better each video.
What that means then is that actually it then gets handed back to us. We get the exports of the full episode. We put the intro sting in between them, and there we go. That's our video done. I export that version, and then we begin uploading. And while we're doing uploading, we would then start working on the title and thumbnail. And by the way, we're still really bad at it. I hate thumbnails. I hate titles. We make a great video, but we somehow still can't seem to get those titles and thumbnails right. And that process. We need to hire someone who could do it better than me. That. We press publish. Great. Enjoy the video. I'm sorry the titles and thumbnails suck. Okay. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Huge thanks to Riverside for literally making this podcast possible. We couldn't do it without you guys.
You've seen us use Riverside throughout this whole video. If you want to use it yourself, the link is in the description, and use code EDITINGPODCAST for 20% off.